Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Daily Roundup. I'm your host today, Adam. So today I'm very fortunate to be joined by Sid. Sid, you've been crushing stream all week. You're doing an incredible job. So thanks so much for being here today. Yet again, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right, and it's an absolute pleasure to be joining you as well. And of course, for all of our viewers out there, it is great to be engaging with them and to go through the comments that they might leave behind. I know we do have a lot to get to, though, especially in short order. Adam, do you want to fill us in, and how have you been doing?
Yeah, wonderful. I am doing great. No complaints whatsoever. It has been busy in Calgary, no doubt. Also busy in Ottawa, and we're going to get to that right away here. But before we do that, I do want to get to some of the nuts and bolts of the day. If you are watching us, you're likely joining us on Rumble, Odyssey, YouTube, or Getter. That's wonderful. We're happy wherever you're joining us from. I would just encourage you to consider swapping over to one of the free speech platforms like Rumble that doesn't control what people say or control what people think, but rather simply provides them a platform. And as Sid mentioned there, you have the opportunity to engage with us through what is called Rumble Rants. Rants give you an opportunity to chip in just a couple of dollars, and that allows us to keep the lights on here, keep us working, keep us telling the other side of the story. But it also gives us the opportunity to have a conversation with you, to have some feedback with you. So that is really, really important. And we don't like just having government handlers telling us what to say. We like actually hearing from people who live in this country, who watch Rebel News on a daily basis, who are experiencing all these stories up close, not just from afar. Very fortunate today that we are going to be joined by our Rebel reporter on the ground covering the Tamara Lich trial. Of course, Tamara Lich took on a critical role in the Freedom Convoy, and she's now she obviously spent time behind bars, and she's now facing trial for misdemeanor, among other things, criminal mischief, all of these sorts of absurd charges. I think Sid, you covered. You were down in Milk River, Coots, obviously extensively. We saw this firsthand. What people say about what happened and what really happened, two completely different stories. It's going to be the same thing, I think, as far as these trials are concerned. Is the media might be saying one thing, but we have our own people on the ground sharing the other side of the story. What do you think about that, Sid?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I still remember quite literally during the Coots blockade, there was a sort of double blockade that occurred where people had gone through a police barrier and reinforced the Coots blockade. And there I was in the middle of the highway, 30-kilometer winds, -40 weather sort of environment. And I was filming them approach and go car by car. And where were the mainstream media? They were with the RCMP. They actually got a ride in by the RCMP. And their proximity to these issues causes a heavy amount of fault in their coverage of these events. Especially, we've been talking about this here and there through the week. And the amount of money that the Trudeau government has given these mainstream media outlets, it does tilt their description of events. And I think it's a very unfortunate thing to see. But of course, we do have that trial, and we do want to get to our reporter on the ground there. Adam, is there any takeaways before we jump to him?
Yeah, we're going to jump to this one article really quick to just kind of highlight what we're talking about as we pull our Rebel reporter on the ground, Robert Kraychik, up. It's the prosecution evidence undermines their own anything but peaceful Freedom Convoy claim. They're playing a bunch of TikTok clips from Chris Barber in which he's repeatedly saying peaceful, 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 peaceful. It's just so interesting, and we've covered court cases before. There's so much undermining of what they are delivering, what they are saying. Over and over and over, and then the evidence just clearly speaks to the contrary. We saw the same thing. Pastor Art obviously saying peaceful, peaceful, peaceful. They chose to focus on something else altogether. It's this over and over and time again. Something that really summed this up for me in a nutshell, though. I don't know if you had the opportunity or if you've commented, but there's the video of the camera people knocking over the gentleman on the bench's bike, and then Tamara Lich comes in and picks up the bike. That's what this thing seems like in a nutshell to me.
Yeah, well, and remember previously, I believe either she was being released or there was a bail granted to her, and the reporter that was outside this event of Tamara Lich being walking out of this building got into some kind of physical altercation with the demonstrators. I mean, you'd think you'd want to be able to keep your cool if this is a professional status job that you're trying to uphold as a professional journalist, but here they are fighting and knocking over bicycles. It's pretty sad behavior from our mainstream media.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. So we're just waiting to hear back from our studio here as Robert is getting connected, obviously patching in from the ground there can be a little bit technical. We don't, as you know, have those multi-million-dollar media trucks that they roll out with the satellites and everything. For folks who contribute, who support Rebel News Plus, whatever it may be, when you're giving us a couple bucks there, if you're doing a Rebel rant day, or a Rumble rant rather, those few dollars go a long way, because we really do grassroots journalism. The other day I actually went in to interview Tim Stevens. It was pretty funny. He said, oh, the other journalists, well, quote unquote journalists, the mainstream media, they roll in, they've got 3 people and they're rolling in rigs and everything like that. We go up, we can cover an entire Coots protest, Milk River protest, one person with a camera. Sometimes it's a person filming themselves even. So that's absolutely just so the case that's going on right now. We can now jump to our live Rebel reporter who is in the field, Robert Krajcik. We're going to have an update from the ground. Looking forward to asking some questions. Hey, welcome. How are you doing, buddy?
Great. How about you?
Oh, I'm doing wonderful. Thanks so much. I guess the first question I wanted to ask you, we're going to get into what you're seeing in the courtroom, but first, talking to people around the courts, the people who are there supporting, protesting, whatever it may be, what's the sort of energy you're feeling from people towards Tamara Lich, towards this trial, towards what's happening?
Well, the vast majority of people that are here that are not directly involved in the trial are her supporters. So it's broadly sympathetic towards her and Chris Barber.
Yeah. So the other day there, and I was just talking to Sid about this, who's also here with me. There was this video, and it was a camera person backing up, knocking over a bike, and sort of disheveling someone's situation. And then Tamara Lich sort of reached in, picked up the thing. I've met Tamara plenty of times. That kind of seems like Tamara Lich in a nutshell. Is that kind of the energy you're getting from people who are there supporting Tamara, concerned about what's happening?
Absolutely. Just want to give a major shout out to my colleague Lincoln Jay, who was there to catch that. And I was reading some of the comments on the video that was posted because, I want to see how the audience is reacting to what we're doing. And a lot of people noted that, remarked on that, and it stuck with them. And I think it's sort of a reflective contrast of the difference in character between Tamara Lich and whoever that generic drone NPC news media guy was or is.
Now, I'm going to give Sid an opportunity to ask a question. I've just got one more for you. One of the things that I noticed, whether it was covering court and live tweeting directly throughout COVID, or sort of watching remotely, was sometimes the judges seem to be leaning a certain way, or you're picking up a vibe. Now, sometimes they're sort of misleading, and the whole thing can feel like it's going one way, it goes another way. Are you getting any sentiment like that either way? We're not calling for you to predict an outcome or anything, but what sort of what direction or what sort of pressures is the judge leaning more one way or another? What's that experience been like within the courts?
Don't worry, I won't predict, but I'll give you an absolute assessment. There is a sentiment. You can pick up on a demeanor. All of the judges' interjections thus far have been in contention towards the prosecution, towards the Crown, and arguably in favor of the defense. I'll give you an example from today. Today, really, the major takeaway thus far is on this very note. The judge said at least 3, if not 4 times that she is, quote, very unhappy with what the prosecution was trying to do this morning, which was to sort of not exactly introduce new evidence, but to refine a segment of evidence that it intends to use against Lich and Barber in pursuit of its conviction. So specifically, the prosecution dumped something like 4,000 pages of chat logs that are extracted presumably from the mobile devices of Lich and Barber, and now today into the trial says, oh, these are the pages we want to use. And the judge was unhappy with that because that's sort of compromises the ethic of disclosure, given that it's very difficult for the defense to catch up with that. We're talking about thousands of pages. And the defense also raised that objection saying, look, guys, we can't go through this on immediacy. And we're actually on an extended recess right now to resolve this issue that was brought about by the prosecution's late specificity in terms of what evidence it wants to use. And again, to your point, it just indicates some sympathy from the judge towards the defense, or at a minimum, and clearly dissatisfaction with the methods of operation from the Crown.
Yeah, and hopefully that sticks, because I know in some cases, whether it was Justice Adam Germain, lots of the details and the questioning would seem to be going one way, and then the resolution would go a completely different direction altogether. Interesting to see all this new evidence being, well, not new evidence being presented, but a sort of, they presented with an immeasurable number of pages that would be almost impossible for lawyers to get through. The costs involved, which the Democracy Fund thankfully is crowdfunding the legal fees, but to have a lawyer go through all that, and then for them to say, actually, we're just focusing on this specifically, you'd hope they would have known that all along. The interesting thing here, though, is that the government, when asked to provide, here in Alberta anyways, any evidence for COVID, it took them for justifications for the restrictions, whatever it may be, it took them months, years to put that together. It should have been done within weeks. So apparently the Crown, they can get massive extensions, but the people defending people who are prosecuted cannot. Sid, do you have any questions for our man on the ground in Ottawa?
Absolutely, and we'll maybe get back to talking about the Whistle Stop Cafe in a moment. But I wanted to know from you on the ground, what other key takeaways, you gave us the main one, what other key takeaways are there to give people the understanding of what's happening here? And what is the schedule? Because I understand this trial is going to take place over a couple of weeks. What are we actually looking at here?
Okay, I'll give you the major takeaways, and then I'll give you this sort of anticipated conclusion date, which is still very tentative and likely to be extended. So major takeaways are that the prosecution continually undermines its own central argument. The opening statement of the prosecution was that the Freedom Convoy was, quote, anything but peaceful. Now, how did they contradict their own claim? They played this video on day one. It was a video montage, 11 and a half minutes, of mostly body cam footage collected by police officers on the ground, and also some aerial drone footage. Clearly, the prosecution sought to paint a picture of something unruly, something dangerous, something unlawful. None of that was seen in any moments of that video. So the video itself does not capture anything beyond peaceful protest. Even worse, one of their witnesses that they introduced, this was sort of like the chief police liaison officer who dealt with the sort of logistical response from the Ottawa Police Service towards this Freedom Convoy, said himself under oath while testifying that there was no violence directed towards police officers from the demonstrators. He further iterated that emergency lanes remained open in coordination with the Freedom Convoy demonstrators upon all the streets where their vehicles were parked to allow for ambulances or fire trucks if needed, with the small exception of a segment of Wellington in front of Parliament Hill that, again, undermines the claim that this was some sort of unlawful protest. So their own witnesses, their own evidence undermine that. And that's the major takeaway thus far. And as far as the conclusion of the trial, I think it was scheduled for, don't quote me, it's 3 weeks. That's how long me and my colleague are going to be down here for, but it's going to go beyond that.
Well, we're so grateful that we do have you there on the scene, as well as your camera operator and video journalist who's doing incredible work. Some of those moments, I retweeted that and I said, this is Tamara Lich in a nutshell. And if Rebel wasn't there, if you weren't there filming this, telling the other side of the story, our incredible film Church Under Fire sort of documents so much of went on. Hold the Line, the book, captures Tamara Lich's story, but this is another chapter in this important moment in Canadian history. Very fortunate to have you on the ground. You're doing incredible work. So thank you so much for joining us today, Robert. Really appreciate it. I'm sure we'll be touching base with you as the trial progresses, so folks can look forward to that. Thanks so much.
Thanks for the kind words. Back at you.
I do really quickly want to say to Ciao Bella Thorani, said, love the shirt. God keep our land glorious and free. This is available on the Rebel News Store, rebelnewsstore.com. If you use the code Adam10, if you haven't used that before, you can get 10% off your order. It's a really great shirt. They're reprinting them on these new incredible shirts now. The quality is so good. They're very comfortable. Go grab one of those. We're very fortunate now to be joined in just a few moments. We're going to go to an ad break as we get him connected, but by Alan Honor, the litigation director of the Democracy Fund, who, as you know, is crowdfunding the legal defense for Tamara Lich, making it possible for her to have the best defense and to have his fighting chance in court, says so many authorities come down on her. So we're going to have Alan Honor join us in just a moment. Before that, though, as we get that connected, we're going to jump to a quick commercial break.
Do you want to start feeling like your pre-COVID self again? You're not alone. The wellness company's Spike Support Formula is an all-natural supplement to help people do just that. It was created by cardiologist Peter McCullough and his expert team of doctors to help the people experiencing effects from COVID and the you-know-what. Go to twccanada.health/rebel today.
Great to be joined now by Alan Honor. Alan, how are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks very much.
Wonderful. So I guess my first question for you, we just had Robert Kraychik on. We got his perspective on this. But what's your sort of impression? Obviously, we heard a little bit about some evidence at least being shifted, or a large amount of evidence being very narrowed specifically down to just a few pages of documents. But can you tell us a little bit about the legal proceedings today so far?
Well, the legal proceedings today mostly involve submissions made by defense lawyers and the Crown Attorney about the disclosure of certain documents. In some cases, there hasn't been disclosure of documents, and in other cases, there has been disclosure of documents. But the extent to which the Crown intends to rely on some of those documents has changed over the past 48 hours. And so that has, to some extent, derailed part of this trial. We're probably going to be looking at more days of time. And this afternoon, because of that issue, we're going to go on to something else, something that's not impacted by this disclosure issue.
Right. And so the judge, it seems like we're kind of hearing that they to some extent derided the prosecution for not following protocol, not doing this properly. Is that accurate?
Well, there's a whole history that precedes today. And I wasn't there for all of it, so I can't comment on it. But, the judge did take steps to say that she wasn't calling anyone's integrity into question, not the defense lawyers, not the Crown Attorney. But, she's unhappy about this. I'll call it a disclosure fiasco. And, Adam, it's not that uncommon in a criminal trial for there to be issues that pop up here and there. Criminal trials are very rarely smooth things. And this is a complex trial happening over many years. So I think you can expect to see more bumps along the road in the future.
Now I'm going to jump over to my colleague Sid here in just a moment, but the Democracy Fund is obviously crowdfunding the legal fees for this at helptamara.com. Can you just talk about, for folks out there who maybe don't understand, how much work goes into preparing? We're talking about even one matter of evidence here is like 4,000 pages worth of text, but how much work goes into preparing a defense to ensure that someone who's ultimately fighting for their legal freedom, fighting for their lives, has the best defense possible?
It's a massive amount of work, Adam. For every day you spend in court, you're probably spending at least 2 days prepping for it, plus all of the work that happens before that, right? So we've had disclosure motions. We've had motions for particulars. There have been bail hearings, right? There have been bail reviews. The amount of money that a trial like this cost, and it's about 16 days now, but it might be more, is prohibitively expensive. And the average person who is charged with something like this would not be able to afford it. And so we have been crowdfunding for the defense of Tamara Lich, and our donors and supporters have stepped up. They know that this is an important trial. And with their assistance, we have hired one of the best lawyers in Ottawa, in fact, one of the best lawyers in Canada. His name is Lawrence Greenspan, and he's defending Tamara. He is doing a good job so far, and I expect him to do a good job all the way until the end of this trial.
Wonderful. Well, for folks out there, if you're struggling because of this government, if inflation has got you down, please hold on to your money. But if you are able to give, if you are able to contribute, this is going to be an important, critical, and very often precedent-setting case for these types of stories. It's going to determine whether the government can do things like this moving forward or not. So consider chipping in at helptamara.com. And I'm going to throw it over to my colleague Sid here. Any questions?
Well, I know obviously these legal matters are still before the court, but I do want to know from the work that the Democracy Fund and yourself have done to help a lot of people across the country with these tickets and the charges that have stemmed from the pandemic, as it were. Are you noticing a trend? I know there was a lot of tickets that have been dropped already, and you guys have been fighting tooth and nail for an extensive number of clients. What if you had to put all of these into one basket and look at the situation? How would you describe it?
You know, what typically happens, Sid, with any trial, whether it be a civil trial or a criminal trial, if the case is weak for some reason, it tends to get resolved in advance of trial in some favorable way. With respect to these protesters, and obviously not all of them are as high profile as Tamara, but we're still defending them. Their cases, I think, in other situations would be dropped, but they're not being dropped, and they're going to trial on, I think, in some cases, fairly weak evidence, and we're just going to start seeing those now. And so, for whatever reason that is, I can't tell. I'm not a part of the Crown Attorney's office. I think you'll have to come to your own conclusions about that.
Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us, keeping up this incredible work and keeping us posted. I'm sure we'll be touching base frequently over the coming weeks as this trial unfolds. But yeah, thank you so much for being there on the ground, taking some time. I know you're undoubtedly busy to speak with us and provide us with this update.
To you both.
So we are going to jump to a quick ad break now, and then we're going to come back and roll through some stories in expeditious fashion. Great to have those two folks who are on the ground giving us a first-hand account of what happened.
Justin Trudeau's new censorship law, Bill C-18. It's a shakedown and a desperate attempt to keep the mainstream media afloat. Many have already lost their ability to access our Facebook and Instagram pages. The blackout will soon affect every user in Canada. We've partnered with Private Internet Access, a VPN provider dedicated to safeguarding digital privacy. For just $2 a month, you can maintain your access to our content across all your devices at piavpn.com/rebelnews.
Now, in completely unsurprising news, we've been talking about the call for an inquiry into foreign interference that everyone on Earth can see seems to be occurring. Even if they're right about 1% of them, that's still far, far too much, because whether it be Chinese interference or funding that's going out, whatever it may be, we've heard these stories over and over again. And in a move that sounds just about right. I don't have information about this Quebec judge. We are looking into it to see if there's liberal ties, that stuff. But the federal government has appointed a Quebec judge. Shockingly, it's not a conservative Alberta judge, but a Quebec judge to lead the foreign interference inquiry. Opposition MPs had repeatedly accused Trudeau and his cabinet of deliberately stalling the inquiry, which MPs endorsed in 3 separate votes on March 2nd, March 23rd, and May 31st. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has finally tapped a judge willing to oversee the contentious inquiry into Chinese foreign interference. According to multiple sources, Quebec Court of Appeals Justice Marie-Auzée Augue will head the inquiry after months of negotiations between the government Liberals and opposition parties. Now, this goes on and on, but effectively they're saying that's going to take something like 16 months to get through this, and they're saying that might not even be enough time. This government won't be in by then. So they did a 6-month delay or whatever, and they hired one of their friends. They delayed that. Now they're hiring somebody. Now they're saying it's going to be 16 months. The odds, if you're looking at polls of Justin Trudeau still being the leader of this country and the Liberals being in power, are all for naught. So what do you think about this? The lack of sort of, if anyone of us was doing anything like this in our place of employment or in our life, there would be consequences. But the government can effectively, the same way they didn't hire an ethics commissioner, just set this off for as long as they want, do whatever they want to do, and then, well, 2 years after we're out of power, we're going to have a report saying, yeah, indeed, we did collaborate. And at that point, Justin Trudeau will be out of the country anyways, probably.
Well, and for all the hate towards Justin Trudeau, how much action has come to a concrete resolve in holding him accountable? I mean, that's what we see time and time again, and especially with these judges. We did touch on this a bit yesterday, but I shared with one of our producers a few links, and it does seem like this judge did work for the same law firm, I guess it were, that Trudeau's father worked for. And I can't Yeah, so I can't I can't say that they were working there at the same time or anything like that. I haven't, fully done my research on that, but I can say they worked there. They worked at the same place. They did have some kind of engagement together, the Trudeau family and this judge, in even if it's in the smallest sense, and that should be investigated. But is it going to be? Probably not. Much like we're seeing, and as you mentioned, these delays, they keep delaying things further and further and further. Perhaps, and more likely than not, hoping that they'll be out of office by the time this accountability comes home to roost.
Well, Mr. Johnson worked for the Trudeau Foundation. He was on the board. And now they're hiring someone who apparently worked at the same law firm. You know what? Perhaps they investigated. Perhaps it was, she was a paralegal there. So maybe there's some remote connection. But you'd think, and I'm thinking like a sensible human being, not like a Trudeau liberal, but you'd think there'd be a concerted effort to make sure there wasn't an easily discoverable personal tie between Trudeau or his dad and the person that they've hired to investigate this after what happened last time. But the degree to which this federal government thinks that they're just beyond reproach and that they don't have to answer questions is wild, isn't it?
Yeah, no, to say the least. And perhaps just before we get a little further into this, I do want to mention, in terms of these judges and these legal matters and all this jazz, it is absolutely absurd, the state of affairs we're living in. And the Whistle Stop Cafe, they're a prime example of this. Adam, you were there on the ground to tell this story, and we had Chad Williamson of Williamson Law, of course, representing these guys to help, and you can help them, and Tamara Lich, again, through the democracyfund.ca. But Adam, just give us a little glimpse into the Whistle Stop situation and why that whole thing ended.
Well, so and you're talking about the Ingram decision, presumably. Is that where we're going? So it's interesting for folks out there who don't recall. My first report ever was the Whistle Stop, when police effectively came and shut the place down. That was the first. They sent me out there. They're like, "Hey, can you go out to the Whistle Stop? This will be your first story." So my very first story was the Whistle Stop. So it hits close to home. It feels like it was forever ago. It wasn't that long ago. But effectively, what happened was this Ingram ruling that you've no doubt heard about came down, and effectively it was determined that this was these rules, these restrictions, they were illegal. They were effectively illegal. And the reason they were illegal was not because they trampled fundamental rights, they trampled fundamental freedoms, but it's because there was a political sort of interference angle, and that Jason Kenney's government was directing Dina Hinshaw to an extent they wouldn't. Now, people are sensibly concerned about that, because why should we want it to be exclusively an unelected official making all the decisions? And the key problem should have been the trampling of freedoms, not that. But effectively, the rules that they were being punished under were, the term is ultra vires, which means beyond the extent of power. I believe I might be getting that wrong, but the government basically overstepped, and that's why we've seen acquittals on James Coates, Pastor Tim Stevens, the Whistle Stop, all of this. What's interesting, though, if we're talking about the provincial government being held accountable for doing things beyond their power and for exerting influence, why is there no accountability like that whatsoever for this federal government that seems to overstep at every possible turn?
Well, and the one big thing there is, how long did it take to get to this point? And very much so, we talk about how the process is the punishment. And that's been the case for a countless number of individuals who eventually, after going through these legal matters and the proceedings, have had their tickets and charges dropped. But not only that, is so too, in particular with the Whistle Stop, it's my understanding that before that other ruling took effect onto this case, before there was a constant battle for disclosure. And that disclosure battle was looking uglier and uglier for the AHS. Is that fair to say, Adam?
Oh, absolutely. And I encourage people. I know there was an issue. It wasn't listing quite properly, but Pastor Tim Stevens it's on Rumble. You can find it now. Pastor Tim Stevens is actually taking legal action against the police chief in Calgary, Mark Neufeld, as well as Alberta Health Services, because as an extent of that Ingram ruling, he was wrongfully imprisoned. When they arrested him, they had no basis upon which to arrest him. And actually, that wasn't directly the Ingram ruling. You'll likely remember the Rook order back in the day, which forbid gatherings, and it applied only to Glenn Carrott and the Whistle Stop, Chris Scott. they decided that they were going to apply that to all Albertans, and they arrested Tim Stevens falsely. So not only are the other charges from Ingram pending, but those charges extended. So we have a whole interview talking about how he was basically illegally arrested and spent time behind bars. So John Carpy breaks it down, but he talks about the sentiment of justice delayed is justice denied, and the fact that they shouldn't have even implemented those restrictions in the first place, because what you're talking about is they asked for evidence for the lockdown metrics, for disclosure as to why they're making these decisions. And the government basically did not respond. But instead of then saying, okay, well, all these restrictions are set aside until you can provide evidence, they simply left them in place. And people were waiting and waiting and waiting. But people have been behind bars because of a lack of disclosure. People have gone through hell because of a lack of disclosure. And, you know, it isn't justice. And this is why some people are upset about the Ingram decision. It isn't justice to simply say, oh, there's an acquittal and you're fine now. These people have been through strip searches, incarceration, being vilified, the names they were called on the internet and the media. It's so funny now to see the media sharing Tim Stevens' story, even if it's only a 40-second sound bit, but it's a little apologetic and changing the tone significantly. These people, including Tamara Lich, have been through everything while the government sort of twiddled their thumb. So not surprised to hear this again with this court proceeding.
Well, I don't think it's a stretch of the imagination to say that we've been through 2 years of hell because of this pandemic, as it were, the lockdown measures that politicians implemented, to be specific. But we are getting to that point now where I guess the baggage is becoming too much. And we even see liberals are frustrated. Frustrated liberals say Pierre Poilievre is crushing them. And some of them are blaming Justin Trudeau. A lot of people are blaming Justin Trudeau now. It's not just the Conservatives or the right wing, as it were. It seems like across the country, it doesn't matter who you're with or where you're from or who's giving you financial incentives, like a lot of the mainstream media here. Even they themselves have had enough of Justin Trudeau, it seems. Adam, what do you make of the shifting tides here? I know we've been talking about it, how he's been losing a lot of face and, you know, certain situations of his that are, you know, personal situations, I suppose you could say, have taken an effect. What do you make of this hot mess with Trudeau?
Well, I love the Toronto Star here. Like you say, the tide is shifting. It's more like the rats are jumping ship. This is what is happening right now. We're going to play a clip later as well with a journalist asking Trudeau tough questions and following up. The Toronto Star, they're still not willing to break their ties with the Liberals. So now they're doing liberal apologetics and saying, no, the Liberals are good. Trudeau's the problem. They might know that a leadership shift is coming or something that we don't. But it's incredible to see just everybody shifting their perspectives. They weren't willing to hold him accountable. They weren't willing to hold him accountable on vaccines, on COVID, on China, on some of his history. The list goes on of the scandals involved with this guy. But now suddenly the tide is changing, and as you mentioned, these folks are like, oh no, Trudeau's actually bad. Ultimately, though, and this is tough for some folks to hear out there, though, the media is to blame for this in part. Trudeau is to blame for this in part. But the fact is, not until now have the majority of Canadians said, this guy's not a good guy. Canadians wanted this. Canadians asked for this. And that is the key issue. Now, don't get me wrong. The media party brainwashing and manipulating and twisting the story and not holding them accountable, it contributed to that. But ultimately, Canadians did want this guy, and they're finally coming to their senses. And if Canadians want that, if Canadians are pushing for that, you aren't going to see a shift in the courts where they're getting it right necessarily. I mean, now courts are starting to get some things right, but you aren't going to see that shift. You aren't going to see the shift in the political culture, and you aren't going to see the shift towards accountability and political leadership when they can do anything, ethics violation after ethics violation, spending scandal after spending scandal, and people will still vote for them. Why would Trudeau have changed this entire time? He wouldn't, because he just kept winning and doing whatever he wanted, and it didn't matter. Now, for the first time, there is a shift. There is a metric of accountability. I won't be surprised if either Trudeau changes his tone, which I don't know, maybe he's so arrogant that he can't, or the Liberal Party goes into like recovery mode. Maybe he steps aside. There's a new leader. But I hope people don't buy this narrative of, oh, well, that was just Justin Trudeau and he's gone now. The shelf life's over. But the Liberals are still the good guys. Conservatives are the bad guys. Vote for them. I hope that doesn't happen again. Do you think it might? Do you think people are going to fall for this again?
Well, I mean, the leader is a representative of the party in many senses. Justin Trudeau is very much an example of what a liberal looks like, because that is the cesspool they hang around with, basically. I mean, you look at Chrystia Freeland, she's a prime example. She's what, the Deputy Prime Minister of Canada. Even if we got rid of Justin Trudeau, she's probably 10 times worse. It's just that she hasn't been the one taking most of the heat so far. I mean, she's the one who seized bank accounts during the Freedom Convoy. She's the one who tells starving parents to cancel their Disney Plus subscriptions so that they can feed their children. I mean, this woman is out to lunch, and she's taking advantage of Canadians. She's just doing it under the veil of Justin Trudeau. Yeah. So, you know, as much as I think replacing Justin Trudeau for the Liberals would be a good thing, I don't think it is something that will change the nature of the Liberal Party or what it has become. And I say that disassociating the word Liberal from the party Liberal, because as we know, these meanings change over time. What is a Liberal? Yeah. Somebody who's, you know, lenient on what kind of medical treatments you allow yourself, or is a Liberal someone who's going to mandate you inject yourself 6 times a year just to be safe on their standards?
Yeah, exactly. No, there are distinctions between big L and little L liberals for sure. We talked about a video clip just a little bit ago about a politician actually doing, or sorry, a journalist actually doing some variant of journalism. It's refreshing to see tough questions for Trudeau. Why don't we run that clip and discuss?
The Conservatives are having their policy convention this weekend, and they say it's their largest in-person convention ever. Delegates say they're united and they are determined to defeat you. His message appears to be resonating, and he's consistently higher in the polls. Why do you think that your message and your brand does not appear to be connecting as well as it once did?
Well, first of all, on domestic politics, we have a lot of ministers on the ground commenting on that in a blow-by-blow. My focus very much continues to be making sure we're building a better future for Canadians. That's what brings us to this region. That's why the success of the Canada-ASEAN partnership, seeing significant more opportunities for Canadian businesses to invest and create growth here in the region, but also drawing in partners who are interested in investing in Canadian success and creating jobs for Canadians is so key. We are seeing right now a really difficult time, not just for Canadians, but for people all around the world. And the need that we have to continue to stand up as a strong voice for the things that matter, that keep people safe, that keep the economies growing, and engage responsibly and constructively here, are things that really do matter to Canadians.
People are having a really, really hard time. I did that. He's just saying effectively. So more non-answers, but it is good to actually see, despite the non-answers, we can ask questions and Trudeau can give his non-answers. But when you start to see everybody asking questions and Trudeau's giving non-answers, hopefully people will clue in that there's a bit of a pattern there if they haven't over the last however many years. But what's it like to see to hear a question from a journalist that's not from Rebel News or one of the other independent media outlets that actually sounds like a real question?
Well, you know, looking at that clip, and this is speculation, of course, but I think Trudeau realizes that he's done. I think he really realizes it now that his time is over. Like, what do we see him do there? Obviously, it's his standard practice non-answer, but it was a little more than that. It was a little, in my opinion, it felt a little more depressed than his average answer. And I think that's indicative of him realizing his time is over. I really do think it's only a matter of time. We can't expect anything different from him. We've seen even through his, the phases of his life, let's call it, he's still the same arrogant, I'm sure a lot of people have a lot of bad words to say about him. He's a very arrogant guy. And his skills as a drama teacher really excel. You can see it every single day. That's the only thing he does, is he puts on a face. It's truly sad, because we need somebody who has some kind of ability to do something. I know Pierre Poilievre, I mean, he used to be the housing minister. He actually has a foot in something that might actually do some good for somebody, instead of being, I'm sure there's, a lot of value in drama teachers, etc. But this particular one, that is his entire career, is a drama teacher. And, I guess it served him well, because it got him the position of prime minister, but it's the same thing with any narcissist. They can't spend too much time in any given workspace for too long a time, because everyone's going to catch up and realize, oh, wait a minute, you're not the nice, friendly guy you led on to believe, and you're going to have to go somewhere else now.
Yeah, sunny ways eventually lead to sunburns, is I think what we're talking about here. And yeah, it is surreal. I would love to just see if there could be an analytical breakdown of how many questions he's been asked versus whether he's answered them in any qualifiable way. Like, I'm sure he'd get like an F minus grade on actually directing answers to questions sent his way. Speaking of someone else who is completely disjointed from reality and an actor, we've got a bunch of videos of Steven Guilbeault, who is now so desperate that he's running stunts outside of conservative conventions in order to garner some traction and to get some attention for his party. It didn't seem to go exactly as he planned, I think. So we've got a bunch of clips. This is just coming down today of Steven Guilbeault doing this guerrilla press conference outside of the conservative convention. So let's jump to some of those clips and react.
There's energy in this crowd that doesn't that I can't imagine seeing in the Liberal convention. There's an energy and excitement around Poilievre. What is the future of Mr. Trudeau in your party?
I have full confidence in the Prime Minister. I'm here because of the Prime Minister. This is true of all the colleagues that I have spoken to. He is the reason why we're here. He's the reason why we won in 2015, in 2019, in 2021. I support and will continue to support the Prime Minister.
He believes in man-made climate change and Justin Trudeau and the flying spaghetti monster. He's a true like follower. Like he'll go down with Trudeau, I think. Don't you?
Yeah, well, and you can hear it there. He's like, yeah, I'm here because Trudeau told me to be here. Guys, come on. Like, I have to be here. And you know, it's funny, actually, you hear this kind of language from him in some of the old Greenpeace footage that they have on their website, in the archives, I guess it were. And he's sitting there in front of the oil stand, Steven Guilbeault, and he's talking about, oh, you're bad, they're bad, this and that. But then there's someone behind the camera who's kind of telling him how to say it and what to do. He's coaching Guilbeault along with it. Really just a follower mentality on this guy. And it's sad to see what kind of attitude he presents. And, you know, he mentions how he's out there at the conservative gathering there. There was another event that was parallel to this that the Liberals put on. And there was like 12 people in the audience. Probably the same size venue, but the numbers are absolutely staggeringly different. The amount of people that are coming out and engaging with the Liberal Party versus the Conservative Party. But yeah, no, again, what does he say there? I'm here because Trudeau basically sent me here. He's not a man with a lot of initiative.
Yeah, well, it's true. He's a true believer, and he'll go down all the way. Now, there's no doubt why he's a believer here. I mean, look at the connections he has. Guilbeault in this next clip. You know what? Let's just run the clip on his communist China connections with their climate policies and react. Theoretically, we're queuing it up, I guess. But as you know, oh, there we go. Okay.
Mr. Guilbeault, why do you attack Canadian natural resources when you are participating in the Communist Party of China Climate Forum and refuse to confront them on their practices, like the billion they are investing into coal-fired electricity?
Well, actually, the council was created in 1992, and when Pierre Poilievre was a cabinet minister, his colleague, the Minister of Environment, occupied this. The environment ministers under Stephen Harper occupied the same position I do now as environment minister. In fact, the last environment minister of the Harper government praised the council for the work that it's done to help China tackle its environmental problems. And in fact, on the work plan of the council over the next year, we will be working to tackle coal use in China. We will be working on carbon pricing. So everything you just said that is simply not true. You mentioned it.
So simply not true. She asked a question about attacking Canadian resources while defending China. It's categorically true what Alexa Lavoie, our journalist, asked to Steven Guilbeault there. The fact is that Alberta has a plan, unlike the Liberals, unlike the federal government, to get to net zero by 2050. They're actually implementing a strategy. Now, I've said this before, I'll say it again. I don't care about getting to net zero, but we actually have a plan to do it The federal government doesn't. They're just saying 2035 with no sort of basis or reality, as their cities pollute and dump sewage directly into the ocean, and conservative cities don't tend to do those things quite so much. But he also said on that council that 2060 is completely fine for China. So 2050 with a plan in place, accepting the net zero narrative for Alberta, not good. Alberta bad. 2060 for China, who's we're our number one export to is coal, and they're burning they're burning Canadian coal in China right now and polluting. That's completely okay. Alberta, though, bad. That's the crux of this. That is Steven Guilbeault's perspective in a nutshell. And yeah, just a correction, Mr. Guilbeault. Alexa Lavoie is correct. You are incorrect.
Yeah, well, and if you want to see the state of affairs in Canada when it comes to energy and the environment, just look no further than Alberta. And as you mentioned, Adam, like you got countries like China. Canada is the second largest country in the world. We might only have 50 million people, but we got a lot of land. You contrast that to places like India, places like China, and the sheer volume of people that reside there, and the sheer industrial machinery and the kinds of energy that they're using. It's a much different ballgame, and it's not to say, and I'm not putting it out there that they should stop any of the things that they're doing, but if you want to save the planet, I mean, you'd have better luck lobbying a couple million Chinese people than you will an entire country of Canada. We need to survive. We don't have a lot of leeway here. We live in one of the coldest countries in the world. If it's a little too cold out there and you don't have heat, you die. That's not, anything past science 101. We need to make sure that we survive, and part of that is energy consumption. This is something that the Trudeau Liberals blatantly ignore. They say that you can just live off of solar energy and windmills, and then you actually look at the energy and how that affects the system. It doesn't. You look at the tidal energy they try and implement in Prince Edward Island. They always talk about how environmentally friendly it is. It doesn't make more than 1% of their energy, and the energy that they do use comes from another province, and it's all coal or diesel generated. So this whole environmental fantasy is exactly that, a fantasy. And why would they implement it? Well, it's because that gives them more government regulation, more controls like that, more taxes that they can implement to say that they're going to save the planet by stealing your money and putting it towards their buddy's project.
And the other thing, too, and you sort of touched on it there, is the fact that it is a fantasy and it is a distraction. You ask them any tough questions and they start talking about climate. In Canada, for example, people are struggling to get by. There's a housing crisis. Everything is going awry. There's massive wildfires, which they say are caused by this, even though they're arresting people for arson, likely is an extension of the poverty and mental illness that's going on out there because of the horrible circumstances created by this government. But that's just Canada. So all those things are going on, and they're talking about that. Now we can jump to communist China, one of the greatest human rights violators in history, currently running Uyghur concentration camps for Muslims within the country. You can't imagine what this country is doing to people. You criticize the leader, you get imprisoned and beaten. This is a surreal place to be living. And this is the distraction. We're talking about their environment when we should be talking about their cultural and social environment and what they are doing to people. On a fundamental level, this government should not be doing business with China. The government should not be on Chinese boards. And he says there that, oh, well, the Harper government had people in this. Does that make it okay? Is he saying because Harper did it, it's fine and that's perfectly excusable? I looked into this Chinese committee that they are on. There's effectively like 2 Scandinavian countries, Canada, and then otherwise it's a bunch of NGO sort of funded environmental think tank. So it's not like it's a normal thing for countries to be involved in this. It's the countries that are willing to bend the knee to China, to collaborate with this Chinese regime. That is who is on this, and that is what they're doing. And I don't care if it was someone for the Harper government or someone here, but the distinction is I highly doubt someone on the Harper government would be saying it's completely fine for China to do something contrary to Canada. I'm sure they'd be saying let's move towards some more renewable energies, whatever you want to call it. He's saying they get a free pass. Alberta has to stop. That's the real issue here.
Well, and perhaps before we go on, I can talk a bit about ethical oil, of course. You look at the oil that we're producing. We're providing people jobs. We're providing the Native American community here in Canada. That's one of their largest job-producing assets is the oil industry. You not only that, you think about how this is all a feel-good effect and it's to save the environment, this and that. Well, people are going to consume oil whether or not you like it. I guess in particular to the Trudeau government. And what happened during the situation between Russia and Ukraine? Did we step up and build a pipeline to the East Coast so that we could ship as much oil as possible over to Europe so that they could reduce their dependency on Russia? No. Well, then what are we doing? I mean, you want to save the planet, you want to do better for the world and save people. Well, there would have been a great way to do it. If that was your pitch, you could have actually done some real good, because not only are we producing it in an ethical manner, we're also doing it in some of the most environmentally, not restructuring, but environmentally friendly ways as possible, in the sense that we are trying to clean up these messes. We do have standards in place so that you can't just create waste of the land here in Canada. You actually have to put resource back into it and take care of what you're taking out of. So it's a much different ballgame than we have in the rest of the world, but they're not willing to capitalize on it.
Absolutely. And it goes on even with this moratorium on renewable energies. They're saying, hold on a second, we need to make sure we have a plan to have responsible stewardship. That's authentic environmental planning, and they don't want that either. It's all this unilateral agenda. We have got 10 minutes. Is there one more thing, Sid? And then we've got a ton of woke stories to get through.
Let's go to the ad break.
Go for it. Okay.
Canadians are grappling with news blackouts on social media due to the Justin Trudeau Liberal government's Bill C-18. This new piece of legislation demands that social media platforms pay the government for news shared by users, which is an inconceivable task for companies like Meta and Google. So, as a result, they have decided to preemptively block all Canadian news content, including ours at Rebel News. In response to this, we have since teamed up with VPN provider Private Internet Access to ensure that you can continue to access all of our content across a broad range of platforms, while also maintaining your privacy. For only $2 a month, you can bypass Trudeau's new censorship laws while you safeguard freedom of speech and continue to get the news that matters to you the most. Visit piavpn.com/rebelnews to take advantage of the 84% discount and 4 months free. As a bonus, PIA has all of its servers located in the United States, not China, and they automatically delete user data from their servers to avoid leaks and government subpoenas for information phishing expeditions. Don't delay. Head over to piavpn.com/rebelnews to stay up to date on the news in Canada and protect your access to it. Don't delay. You don't want to be left behind.
Okay, we've got about 10 woke stories to get through, so we're going to do less than a minute per story. Study blames toxic masculinity for men buying less EVs, not poor infrastructure. So obviously, folks out there understand the grid simply cannot handle all the electric vehicles that they want people to drive. But I want to take a look at this word, toxic masculinity. They must mean, when they say toxic masculinity, people working construction jobs, people who need to drive more than a couple hundred kilometers a day, people who need to load equipment into their vehicles, people who need to drive more than a couple of kids around. That's what they must mean by toxic masculinity. They also must mean the hardworking middle-class folks who can afford $50,000, $100,000, $150,000 electric luxury vehicles. Those must be the examples of toxic masculinity who aren't buying these EVs. What do you think, Sid?
I'm tempted to hire a couple of construction guys to just follow Guilbeault around and catcall him about his environmental policies. To say that, toxic masculinity is to blame for men buying less electric vehicles. I'm sorry, but that just brings me back to high school. I went to an all-guys high school. I feel like I can't say anything about this because anything I say about this will be absolutely horrible. That's how stupid I think this is. So maybe we'll go on to the next headline.
Yeah, let's do that. And just for folks, we did have Alexa as well follow, and Guillaume, I believe, follow Monsieur Guilbeault, we'll call him. And I think we're going to have a full report with follow-up questions as they followed him, by the way, to his motorcade with several vehicles that I could hear. I think in the video you can hear engines running. I don't think they're electric vehicles.
No, that's the sound of little Oompa Loompas in the engine.
Yeah.
Riding a little bicycle in the engine.
Yeah. Of course, yeah, Willy Wonka's EV factory. Red Deer Catholic school trustee faces dismissal over hate-filled post on social media. Now, the hate-filled post in question was that meme you've likely seen of a German children and like Hitler Youth, presumably waving little flags, and then underneath there's kids wearing waving the new pride flag with the extra parts on it. So you've likely seen that meme. Now, if you're going to draw comparisons between one of the most brutal events in human history, the Holocaust, and things going on, you have to be very discreet. Perhaps a trusty school board person shouldn't be posting a meme that doesn't have context, because you can say leading up to the horrible events in Germany, here's the brainwashing you saw, there was Hitler Youth, these were some of the strategies. You can make a nuanced point about that, but maybe throwing this up right up as a school trustee in Red Deer, who is, I believe, via marriage related to the former Education Minister of Alberta, probably maybe something you want to back away from. 100% free speech, go for it. But I think that when you're making an extremely delicate point and you're in a public position, you want to do so carefully, elegantly, and get into the nuance rather than simply posting something that people are obviously going to react to in an adverse fashion. What do you think, Sid?
Well, I think in our day and age, a big issue is soft censorship. People who will automatically censor what they have to say because they're worried that it could, be in violation of this, that, whatever. I think go for it, and obviously be respectful. But I think people should just be able to say what they want to say, because that's the only way you can actually think. If you can't put your own thoughts to words, you're not able to think. You're not able to be corrected. So this issue of somebody might say something bad, whatever. If they're just going to hold on to that feeling and they're going to feel as though they can't express that for decades, it's going to build up and they're going to double down, triple down. There aren't going to be people that come along and dispel some of these falsehoods in the thoughts that one might have. And this is the same thing with every single person out there. You need to be able to say what's on your mind so that you can be corrected if that is the course that needs to be had. But without that first step of being able to say those things, we're all done for.
Yeah, well, and I think you're right that sharing this to make this point, and maybe it can be misconstrued. Should someone lose their career over that? Absolutely not. But I think I think she could have been more effective and more impactful if she came out and made a video explaining some of her concerns rather than just hitting retweet hoping to get some likes. I think that I think people have the right to do it, shouldn't be punished for doing it necessarily, unless it obviously crosses a pretty egregious line. But I think there's a question of sort of efficacy in getting a message out and predicting how people will react, being clever as serpents and innocent as doves. We have to hit both of those notes as best we can. Jumping now to something I saw the other day. I was at the Telespark quote-unquote science center, and I generally like it there. It's good. It's definitely woke, though. And the thing that shocked me was not all the pride stuff that you're going to see. That's expected now. I don't like it, but whatever. But this warning sign, some of the science at Spark pushes boundaries. This exhibit may push yours. We can scroll down to the exhibit, the tweet right below. It is basic biology and embryology. It's literally just scientific. There's no politics. There's nothing pro-life or anything like that, though embryology evidence is pro-life. But there's just basic models. There's nothing contentious. This is grade school biology. When they have all the other sort of ultra-political stuff, there's no warnings whatsoever. This is the only one I saw in there. And there's a trigger warning about human biology.
Well, if you go back to that first photo, I see a what some might consider a conspiratorial little triangle there. Not to say that there's any correlation or anything like that. Maybe that's what the trigger warning was for. But it's interesting. I mean, the people are. And not to say that people are so sensitive these days, but the system, the very industries that we're surrounded by, try and put us into that sensitive bubble, try and make us, these soft little snowflakes, as it were. And it's very easy to manipulate us and to take advantage of us if we're put into these stupid little boxes. And I think that is a shame. And I think that these, warnings that we have on everything are just absolutely absurd. It's too much gone too far.
Well, yeah, and I think this goes to what you said earlier about, should you be able to say whatever you want? Absolutely. But this is the opposite of this, is there's very basic stuff that no one should be in any way, shape, or concerned about that is now getting trigger warnings. This is the other side of that swing that is absolutely surreal. These two tweets that I just wanted to show folks quickly that are really good. They make a point. One is about tattoos. One is about cigarettes, but they are quite funny, certainly. There are a few health risks associated with smoking, but one online survey found that youth smokers aged 8 to 10 feel access to cigarettes was an important part of their identity. Please don't stop us from being who we are. We have a right to exist, said Alexa, an 8-year-old tobacco advocate. All we ask is one Amazon-delivered government-subsidized pack of cigarettes a day. Some far-right groups have concerns that smoke affirmation movement, but experts say they are fear-mongering and hateful. What does it matter to you? Let kids be themselves, said Tina, smoke affirmation services expert who earns $1 off every tobacco product offered to a child. This is about affirming identities. So there's a tweet about tattoos. There's a tweet about smoking. There's all these tweets that go along this line, but it makes a point that you can spell out for yourselves very effectively.
Well, and you know what they say actually in that image that we see on screen? Would you rather have a smoker child or a dead child? That's the exact kind of language that they're using for kids who think that they need to transition. They're telling their parents, would you rather have a child who transitions or a dead child? That's a very dangerous line of rhetoric that they're using, and they should be held to account for that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a no-brainer at this point. This next video absolutely kills me, and the reaction is so good. So this is about a cast of a film that's set in Denmark in the 1750s, and the journalist asks why there's not any diversity. Let's just run this clip. Great to see some like Hollywood mainstream people just laughing this off.
This is a cast and a Danish production, which is entirely Nordic. It therefore has some lack of diversity, you would say, as also new rules are implied in Hollywood.
What are you on to?
Yeah, sorry, but
from the get-go.
From the get-go, there is some. Okay.
Well, first of all, the film takes place in Denmark in the 1750s.
This is.
That's it in a nutshell. It reminds me of that. Why is there no diversity on the like Argentinian soccer team or football team, whatever you want to call it? Because we're a nation, not a Disney movie. Like this disconnect from reality. But that's great. You watch movies sometimes, and it's like they don't like. There can be parents of two different races, and there's no talk about like adoption or anything like that. They incline you to believe that it's the biological parents, and it just the math doesn't add up. And that's what they're calling like diversity and inclusion. That it's not real. Yeah, it's not real. It's not scientific. It's not centered in reality. And it also sort of rejects the sentiment of like families passing down traditions and values and cultures by being like, no, none of that stuff is real. It's all disconnected.
Well, and you think about this example, right? You know, why weren't there any, people of color in this movie about, 1600s Denmark, where it's just white people? That's such a stupid question. But on top of that, this is what we've been seeing in the industry, is the embedding of people of, let's call it alternative races into characters of a specific race. And why are they doing this? They're doing this for that, social cohesion, feel-good effect, racial equality, blah, blah, whatever they think they're selling. But what does it actually do? You turn Cinderella black. Who are you doing justice to? You took a quote-unquote white man's story, gave it a black person's face, and all of a sudden you're a hero. Well, what about the stories of actual black heroes, actual black kings and queens that they had in Africa? They have real stories. And what does the industry do? They whitewash old white stories and sell it to black people as something new and amazing and racially savioristic in some senses. It's an absolute shame when they have real stories, real character traits, real family values that they should be able to express. There are real stories about black people that can be had, and there are, obviously. But when you see time and time again, they're just repainting over like blackface on these stories. It's an absolute insult, and I'm surprised that more people don't see it that way.
Well, they're implying that like only white stories matter, so we have to appropriate those instead of sharing our own stories, which is wrong. And the other thing that I find so funny too is with the woke narrative, when they do make a film, like I believe it was called The Woman King, it was about an empire that was one of the greatest slave trading empires, and they decided to omit that from the film. So like make films about black culture or Asian generally speaking, African culture, whatever culture you want to talk about. But don't make them like utopic and artificial. Tell real stories about these cultures, because that's what generally happens, other than sort of fairy tale worlds within white stories. But yeah, you don't need to appropriate them for different groups. Have those folks tell their own stories. They can be incredibly successful. Like the Black Panther franchise, it was very successful. God rest the soul of the actor in that film. But those films were successful, and they were authentically a black story from a black. Well, I mean, it's fictional, but they didn't have to appropriate or change something. You look at the new Spider-Man movies with Miles Morales, a black Puerto Rican young man, and those films, they aren't preachy or they aren't in your face, but they showcase a culture without saying, no, Peter Parker's now black. They have their own stories, and those can be powerful. I think you hit the nail on the head there. Next story here, we'll touch on this, one other story, and then we will get out of here because we're running over time. The Coronation RCMP caught an alleged arsonist. A man now faces charges for burning down a church. He burned down the Evangelical Free Church in the town of Coronation, according to the Western Standard, on September 5th, 2023 at 12:57 p.m. The Coronation and Consort RCMP received a 911 call about a fire at the Evangelical Free Church. After the RCMP investigated, they arrested Nicholas Guy Fortier, 23, a resident of Coronation, and charged him with arson and mischief over $5,000. Witnesses saw and took a video of the man who came to the church earlier with a jerry can. You know, this is what 84, 85 number of the churches either burnt down, vandalized, destroyed because of this false narrative of residential school discoveries, that there's been 3 instances where they've dug now, all facing the same ground-penetrating radar that alleges that there are bodies there, and they keep finding rocks, roots, absolutely nothing else. The biggest cases like that in Kamloops, Drea Humphreys obviously did a lot of work, and we have a documentary on that, which you can watch on Rebel News Plus. But we know there's a drainage ditch right in the area, right at the depth that they're saying they found something. This continues to happen based on a false narrative, and the people who propagated that narrative and led so many in this country to hate Christians, to target Christians, they are absolutely accountable for what is happening here. Great to see an individual being caught, but there is a sort of meta concern here about who is responsible for this. And finally, I want to touch on this international students in Canada living in tents on the side of the road story. Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, if I was going to a foreign country to study, I would probably try somewhere to stay. So that, to me, seems a bit odd. But people coming to Canada trust that it is a good place to live and there will be places to live. This is what Canada is becoming under Justin Trudeau. Things are so disorganized, there's such a lack of housing, that this is the image now being sent around the world. The sentiment of Ukrainians going back to Ukraine and people coming here seeking a better way of life in schools and then leaving because there's no way to live. This man, Justin Trudeau, and his government, they're destroying Canada's identity. We're no longer a serious power. We're no longer at the table with the big boys. And now people are even looking at us. It started when Trudeau was dancing in India and making a fool of himself. It started with socks over substance. All of this has been going the whole way. But now this is the outcome that we're seeing, is news articles being read internationally about how people coming here, they can't even find a place to stay. It's not just immigrants. It's not just refugees. It's also students trying to come to school, make something of themselves. This is the new Canadian identity, unfortunately.
No, the world now looks at us with pity. That's the state of affairs that Justin Trudeau has brought us to. The entire world looks at us as though we are a joke. And until he is replaced, day by day, as you mentioned, every single day, this situation that we have here is going to get worse. I mean, how did we get to a point, as you mentioned, that international students in Canada are living inside tents on the side of the road? How does that happen in a sophisticated society, as we like to think of ourselves, where we actually are responsible enough to allow these people to come here to, facilitate whatever means we're looking to facilitate? How are we so irresponsible that we're telling them to come just so they can sleep on the streets?
And it goes a long way to sort of, you see people out on the streets, you assume, drugs, mental illness. There's a lot of presuppositions about unhoused people, as they like to be called. But when you see literal students from comfortable families who are coming here intentionally, traveling in order to seek better education, literally basically living in tent cities because the government is so inept. It sort of shifts your perspective on all this about how bad things are. How many people do you think who otherwise might be living in a small, modest apartment, getting by on their groceries, working a reasonable job, are instead in one of those tent cities because of absurd government policies, inflation, and skyrocketing costs? There's probably more than we would like to admit. So yeah, sad to see. I, for one, am optimistic that with a new government, the optics are quite simply so bad. I'm hoping there's going to be massive investment. I'm hoping lots of these businesses, everyone from Target to Kleenex, not that I support them for their obvious stances, so maybe not Target, but all these major companies that bailed out of Canada, maybe under new leadership, they can say, oh, the clown's gone, Canada's open for business again, and we will see jobs return. We'll see developments of housing. We'll see affordability increase, competition increase. All those things have dissipated under Trudeau. I'm hoping whoever wins the next election, at this rate, we're looking like Pierre Poilievre, will do the right thing and take a stand. Couple chats here before we head out. Sharon Donner, 78, gives us $1 and a smiley face. I think just the smiley face. Thanks so much. Smiles are free, I guess. Have a smile. That is wonderful. And then we have some caps lock from Fraser McBurney, as always, $5. Great to hear from you. What do they do with the broken windmills? They chop them up and burn them. This is true. Cut up the middleman and burn coal for our electricity. Great job, Rebels. Thanks so much. And even sometimes you can't even burn them because they're so resilient. There's actually photos of mass graveyards of these windmills, and they'll never break down. And this is why this moratorium is important. It's like, well, what's the plan for all this stuff? I'm sure eventually they'll come up with like repurposing, like make them into playgrounds or whatever, because the stuff will never break down. But the plans aren't there yet. So this 6-month pause, hopefully, will have solutions and answers for all those questions without us getting ahead of ourselves with those technologies. Sid, any final thoughts for the folks out there?
I guess my last word I would say is just on the Trudeau is that once Trudeau leaves office, the she session will be over. I guarantee it.
Yeah, the she session will come to an end. Hopefully, Sid, it's been great having you join me today. Looking forward to doing it again soon. As always, I want to thank everyone in the back room in our studio for making this possible. We simply couldn't do it without them. It's magic to me. I don't get how they do all of it. We say something, it appears on the screen. Incredible work. But most importantly, I want to thank everybody at home for watching. If you weren't watching, there'd be no point in doing this. So thank you so much for tuning in as always. Stay tuned. Go to helptamara.com if you can. Chip in a few bucks because she's going to need it to ensure she has the best legal defense possible. And as always, I want to thank you all so much for tuning in. For Rebel News, I'm Adam Soos.
You mentioned extreme events like wildfires and hurricanes. Why has your carbon tax not stopped those things if that is the answer to these problems?
This question, which I've heard in the House of Commons by many Conservative Party members, including Pierre Poilievre, is yet another example of the fundamental disbelief that you have in climate science and in science full stop. We won't solve climate